You can always open a new Colab notebook by going to colab.research.google.com and then selecting the new notebook option. Let's go ahead and do that. This is one of my favorite topics. Lists and loops. Let's divide this notebook up. So we're going to start with lists. And so how do you divide a notebook into parts? Use this text cell and then put a hashtag and then put, say, lists. Okay, and we'll move this to the top. And then what's interesting is if you go ahead and add another text cell, and we'll call this one loops, okay, you can press Shift Enter to run it. So you can see with the hashtag, it's showing on the right side what it'll look like. It basically makes it a title. You press Shift Enter here and it's got basically these arrows. And so what's cool about it is you can like hide them by parts, which allows you to quickly access the other part. Okay, so let's start with loops. Now I only like to see, list. And so what I'm going to do is run some code still so that the other one is out of the way. What is a list? We've looked at Python types in terms of individual strings, individual numbers and floats. What if we want to group them together? Well, that's a list. So primes, let's group the prime numbers together. Give it a variable, set it equal to, what's a list? A list uses square brackets in Python. There you have it. And now that would work. That would be an empty list, but you can also separate it out with different values and there's a comma between each value. So for instance, 2, you could have the space, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19. They're the primes under 20. Okay, I'll press Shift Enter to store it and we'll check the type of primes. We're expecting a list. I'm telling you that it's called a list. It's always good to check your types. You can see it as of type list. Okay, so that's interesting. What else is there with lists? The order matters. And the order starts with 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. So how do we get the 0th element of the list? Well, let's put that in as a comment. So access first element of list. Well, there's our list. And what you do is you use this square bracket again, and then you put in a 0, which is the 0, that's the 0th element. It starts counting with 0. And you can see that's the number 2, right? That's actually the first element of the list. Okay, so how would you get the last element of list? Access last element of list. You could think about what it might be, so for instance, if you start with 0 and then you go to the right, you're accessing the elements in order, right? So each number like 7 would give you like, say would it give maybe the 8th element of the list. So it can't be a positive number, it's -1 inside of the bracket. So that's the last element of the list. You can see there you get 19. Add some more coding cells here. Okay, let's look at the methods for lists. So primes dot, not that many, okay? Note some interesting ones. There's sort and reverse. Sort is kind of cool. Append is the most important one. That's how you add an element to a list. So let's append 23, and then maybe let's check the printout and see what we get. Look at that. Okay. Now the slicing is similar to indexing, and so let's look at slicing. So let's do the first 3 primes. Okay, so how do we get that? Well, primes. Okay, so you start with 0, you include it, and you go all the way up to 0, 1, and 2. That will exclude 3. 2, 3, 5, there you go. Now it's 0 by default, and so this is where sort of the excluding 3 is nice, is this is another way to get the first 3 primes. Very cool. How'd you get the last 3 primes of our list? There's an infinite number of primes. Well, we could try it. So -1, -2, -3. You start with the -3 and then take all the rest. Let's see, does that work? And it does. Okay, so that's the basics of lists. Now let's shift to loops. Now for loops, okay, a loop is sort of like a similar idea. So let's display first 10 numbers. Let's say 20. Let's make it let's just start with that. How about display first 20 numbers? Okay, so here's what you do. Use a loop for this. You say for, okay, there's a for loop. We'll talk about this in a minute. Standard for iterator, in, okay, and then it's range 20. Okay, this is the range of the numbers from 0 to 20, excluding 20, by the way. And then what do we want to do? We just want to print out I. So what this sets up, it's the range kind of sets up the numbers between 0 and 20, excluding 20. And for I in means, okay, we're gonna call those numbers I. You pick that variable. You can say whatever you want there. But the point is that we're going to do something to each one of those numbers. In this case, it's just display. Okay, so you can see it does it. Now, how would we do something similar, like print out first, say 50 square numbers. And let's say now we want to start with 1. Okay, so for I in range, now we're going to go starting with 1. If we want to get to 50, we're going to go all the way up to 51. So this has a start and a stop. It also has a counter, which I'll go ahead and show you now. That would count by 1, which is the default. But you could actually count by 2. And so now what we want to do, we want to display, for instance, I squared. Okay? So there's I can't see anymore. Yeah, I got too many of those in. So there's I squared. Note club underlines when there's an error often. Okay, so here's the first 50 square numbers. Scroll down, look at that, 2025, that's this year, so it's a square number. Last time was 1936, next time will be 2116. Cool. Okay, what if we wanted to do something like convert those into a list? So let's say make list of first 50 squares. Okay, there's some different ways to do this. Okay, so you could start with this. So, you can't do this, 50 squares. Python does not allow you to start variable naming with numbers. So this would work, 50 squares equals, and then it started with empty, and now you just run the code above. So for I in range, remember if you want to start with 1 and end with 51, and now, sure, you still want to square it, but now you want to actually append that to the list. So it's 50 squares dot append I squared. Okay? And so that should make that list because now it's actually adding to a new list. So I press Shift Enter and we can check it by, of course, printing it out. It's always good to check to see if it does what is expected, and it looks like it is. And we can try to find 2025. 50 squares, we can index it. It's sort of like it's 45 squared. So if we're starting with 1, that would be our 0. Would it be the 44th? There you have it. Okay, you can also do this using a list comprehension, which is a little more advanced and kind of cooler. And so what you do, it's sort of simple. You say, hey, I want the squares. How? For I in range 1 to 51. And that's a sort of a way of doing it. Now, if you press Shift Enter, you can see it does, in fact, give you the same result. And the last piece connected with lists and loops is that you can loop through lists. So for prime in, remember we had a list of prime numbers. What do we want to do with those primes? I'll do something interesting. Let's print out basically 2 to the prime, so individual prime, I didn't use I here, -1, and press Shift Enter, and what we have are a list of Mersenne primes, okay, and the Mersenne primes, this is a way to generate big prime numbers, but they're not all primes, but they're very famous in the history of math.